We are Vikram and Nokton as the presentation moderators, and we are delighted to see all of you in light of virtual presence today, especially in this keynote section. We do hope that all of you will be able to have some valuable knowledge and experience as takeaways following the talk. So before the presentation, there are a few considerations. In case you have any questions or concerns about the talk, please feel free to leave them in the chat box so we can gather all the questions for the easy responses in the last 5 to 10 minutes. So we gladly welcome Dr. Gabriel in this keynote speech, which is entitled Foreign Language Teacher Education, Lessons from COVID-19. About him, Dr. Gabriel is a teacher who applies the lessons learned in the classroom to his role as academic advisor, researcher, teacher, educator, and author. He's tenured professor of TESOL methodology at the National Teacher Education College and the academic advisor to the Institute of Education at ORT University in Uruguay. He's also a member of the National Roster of Educational Researchers in the National Innovation and Research Agency, part of the National Council for Science, Education, and Technology in Uruguay. The author of over 20 books and numerous academic and professional articles, Gabriel is the first Latino to be elected president of the International Association of Teachers English as a Foreign Language. So please welcome Dr. Gabriel for our talk today.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome. And I want to thank the British Council for inviting me and be at TESOL for making it possible for me to be here. I hope that what I'm going to share with you in the next 30 minutes is not only useful, but it gives you some hope in these very difficult times we are navigating. First of all, I have to tell you that I bring you all greetings from the Board of Trustees of IATEFL. We are currently on board meeting. We met yesterday afternoon, and we are meeting today right after I finished talking to you. And they asked me to extend to you congratulations on this event and all the best for the remainder of the conference. And let me get started right away. I can only address things that I know about. I haven't been a language teacher per se for over 10 years. So I am a teacher educator, and as a teacher educator, I go around the country visiting student teachers who are doing their teaching practice in schools. Now, of course, I've been doing it virtually. The way this works here, I work at the university. We have courses that every course is accompanied by a teaching practice. And what I'm going to share with you today are some lessons learned from my interaction with my student teachers. So I want to also give them a heads up because they have allowed me to share some of the things we've discussed and we've built together with you. So without further ado, let's get us started. In 1986, Lee Shulman developed a theory of what teachers should know. And his work has been very important for all the teaching profession, because for the first time, he was the one to explain clearly what being a teacher entails. And he has this amazing quotation that I would like to get us started with. And it says like this: after some 30 years of analyzing teaching, I have concluded that classroom teaching is perhaps the most complex, most challenging, and most demanding, subtle, nuanced, and frightening activity that our species has ever invented. And if anybody had any doubts about this assertion, I think that the pandemic has proved Lee Shulman right, okay? The last 20 months have been challenging for everybody, but at the same time, they have been a time when a lot of things happened in education, And a lot of things were born in education. One of the things that I had to do as a teacher educator myself was to find a way in which to replicate what we used to do in the classroom with a very varied set of situations that my student teachers had. Like, for example, some of them could not connect. Some could only connect through the cell phone audio, but not the video. Others simply didn't have any connection. Yet, they were expected not only to come to my classes dealing with the theory, but also to actually do their teaching practice in schools with real students who were going through the same problems that they were having. So in trying to create a way to reach out to those students, I developed something called the enable model, and I'm going to present it up front. But then what I want to do is to tell you how, by going through the steps of the model, we have become more engaged as teachers. We have been able to sort out some of the problems that my student teachers encountered. And then when we actually got a hang of this, when we were actually good at our lessons, Uruguayan educational authorities decided we were going back to face-to-face classrooms. And this is also something that I would like to talk to you about. What happens when we go face-to-face? With the end of the pandemic, somewhere on the horizon, I thought that I would be best equipped to share with you some lessons from the pandemic and lessons towards the post-pandemic world that would give you some inspiration and some ideas for your teaching. Without further ado, let me show you the enable model. As a teacher, you all know that you have to learn different things. You learn to be able to see things. You need to be able to see whether students are learning or they are not learning, whether they understand what you teach them or they don't. You need to be able to see how to do things in the classroom. And once you are able to see those things, you should be able to do them. What happens if you just remain at the learning to see is you know about something, but you are not able to do it. And then once you're able to do it and you have a footing, a solid base in doing things, only then can you learn to become, that is to say, can you develop as a teacher. The way I organized, the way I taught teachers was by engaging them in thinking about their experience as language learners. Many times their contact time with the real learners was so little that I needed to get some grounding. And all my students have been language learners because we are not native speakers. So I said, let's capitalize on that. And once we discussed what we call our experience as a language learner, our apprenticeship of observation, I asked the students to notice certain things. I designed activities so that they would say, oh, look, I'm marking. And only after that did I go into the theory. The theory was not only myself, it was my students as well. And immediately after accessing why something is done in language teaching in a certain way, I engage my students in collaboratively planning and trying things out. How? Through micro-teaching, for example. They taught their friends in the classroom. And then we made criticisms, and only then did they go to the Zoom sessions they had with their own students and apply that. But after that, they came back to us. And what they did was They share the results of those things. Sometimes I visited them virtually. Most of the times their classmates visited each other. And this was like the last moment, the extending moment, the reflecting moment on what was the impact of what we've done. But as I said, once we managed this, there was a kind of learning experience, which I call mediated, because I'm not teaching them, they are not learning on their own. This is a co-construction. We are all the time going back and forth between what students know, what they need to learn, what their students need to learn, and we work collaboratively a lot. And then what happened? We went back to classes face to face. Now, I have to tell you that if Vietnam is anything like many countries around the world, going back on site is something people have been clamoring for. Oh, the face-to-face teaching, where there are going to be no problems. There are a lot of expectations about going on site again, something like this, seeing your students hug each other and have the students being present there. But I have to tell you that going back on site is also has as a consequence some very harsh realities. This is a picture of a Uruguayan classroom nowadays. So everything we think of about being able to do collaborative work, being able to do interaction in the classroom is now mediated by social distancing. So going back did not mean that teachers would be able to do things in the way they used to do it. So I have used the enable model to navigate this difficult reality. And these are some of the things that I've learned. Most teachers, we call it la nueva realidad. And I kept it in Spanish because I wanted the power of the new normal, the new reality is very touching to us. Most teachers are like, what is this going back on site? Right? Is this what I was expecting? Because they cannot find it. And I think that the answer lies in the fact that we have to start thinking about different ecosystems, right? Ecosystems which somehow give us different approach on reality. There is a physical ecosystem that we knew and has changed, right? Both for the on-site and coming back. And more importantly, because of the changes over the last 20 months to our routines at home, there's a biological ecosystem that has changed. And of course, if before the pandemic, we were low technology users, there is now a new ecosystem impacting everything we do in the classroom, which is the digital ecosystem. Each of these three ecosystems interact and promote both opportunities and challenges. So I can say that this mirage, this general idea that because we are on site, face to face again, like the pandemic is past, and students are going to learn, there's the key. On site is the key that opens all the beautiful doors to learning. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it is not true. So let's analyze these things one by one. These three ecosystems, remember the physical, the biological, and the digital, have placed new demands on the roles of teachers. So if you thought that going back to classes face-to-face is easier, forget it. It is not. Let's consider the physical demands on the teacher roles that this change implies. We need to reacquaint themselves with what we consider classroom space and teaching strategies. Space now is socially distant. In some places in the world, we are having hybrid classrooms where some of the students are in the classroom and there's a camera for other students who are in their home. The fact that social distancing requires that our students stand at least 1.5 meters apart means that the ready interaction that normally happen in language classrooms cannot happen. And when we go back, we need to relearn how to interact in this physical space, because the way we used to interact has changed. There's also the concept of presence. Presence in the fact of being there, being present in mind, in body, but also in heart. Engaging with the lesson, not switching off and moving on like we can do when we are online. Now, the biological demands are pressing. First of all, our attention span has become quite limited. You know, there's the concept of Zoom fatigue, right? Spending too many hours on Zoom. I think we have all experienced it. And whereas before we talked about the attention span of students, I think now we have to talk about the attention span of teachers and students. Now, during lockdown, we have developed a set of habits that have to do with what you drink, where you sit, where you are comfortable, etc. Right? And most of the times in lockdown, we have led quite a sedentary life with a lack of physical activity. Now, when we go back to the actual four walls of a classroom, that the effect of the lack of physical activity can be felt. I've seen it in students having coordination problems managing the space, but also there's the use of masks that, as we know, having to teach, for example, for teachers, for like 5-6 hours a day, just with a mask covering your face, places a demand on your lungs and the way you breathe, the way you project your voice. Many of my colleagues, including myself, we are developing throat problems, okay? And the digital also has some demands, because if students were using technology, they're used to having immediate access to devices, whereas other students who had a lack of connectivity could not learn at the same rate as those students who actually had access to technology. And this is a worldwide phenomenon, of course. Then in lockdown, and in many places in the world, because of issues of identity protection and privacy, using your camera, your microphone, and that means participating in class, may have been optional, right? Now, when we are in the classroom, we are actually present. We need to be present. And then, because of the uncertainty that we lived in, many students expect immediate certainty. They want the teacher to tell them, to help them to do it so that they can feel safe. And if that doesn't happen, there is demotivation. So with these new demands on teacher roles, let's explore some good things that the pandemic left us. Because I know these are high demand issues for teachers. But believe it or not, the pandemic left us 3 good things. Uncertainty helped us be better prepared to teach, because we didn't know what was going to happen, how many students were going to face in Zoom if we had Zoom, or how many students were going to connect to WhatsApp, or how many students actually completed work online. We were better prepared to deal with that. So it was instant professional development for teachers. What happened as a result of what we did is there are lots of innovations. We found very creative ways to attain our goals. So there are new teaching practices. And in terms of those teaching practices, I can, I think I can safely say nobody has done it alone. For the first time in education, we have actually redefined the roles of our colleagues, and we're thriving on collaboration. So these are new skills, right? Dealing with uncertainty, innovating in the classroom, and collaborating that have imbued the teacher role of a lot of power. Yet, besides the advantages, there are challenges. And I did a quick survey with my colleagues before going back to classes, and I asked them, what are the challenges you have faced during what we call emergency remote teaching? And these are some of the things my colleagues told me. Students' interest, attendance, participation, involvement, socialization. Now, going back to on-site teaching, the same challenges. So what I conclude is that what we need to do is to develop students' autonomy, okay? Autonomy in approaching the new challenges and helping the teacher navigate those situations. Here are a few ideas about learning as a mediated activity. What do we mean by learning? When you can do something on your own, okay? When you are good to do something. But it's true that we don't only learn about the here and now, we also learn in other ways. And the ways in which students have learned during the pandemic are many. Some of them learned from self-resource by talking about their experiences, their memories, putting to play their background knowledge. Others learned with support from an expert. We call that scaffolding. That is when a teacher helps them explicitly. They also got support from peers at their own level, right? So that is collaborative learning. They supported a less able peer, and that is another kind of learning when you have to bring to bear, explain to your friends something new that you have understood and they haven't. That is a second way of learning. And it's true that many times students resorted to technology mediated and technology expanded learning. They went to an online source to watch a video on something they didn't understand. That led them to see another video. So there's like this activation of expanded learning through connectionism. If we consider that this is now the reality of the 5 dimensions that learning can take form, then we need to also think that learning is not only going to happen in our classroom. Learning is going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be in what students do alone, what they do together, the conversations they have. In my country, it's very common for students to have a WhatsApp group. WhatsApp is an app, a telephone app, with the teacher to communicate about course procedures. But then they also have their own WhatsApp group, which is private to the group, where they do a lot of learning. So let me share some things that have worked for the physical ecosystem when we went back to classes. The first thing is,
can you
yes,
turn on your camera again? And there's 3 more minutes until the discussion.
oh, thank you. So these are some strategies for the physical ecosystem. We used routines. We had to create new routines in the classroom for students to come in, where to sit, et cetera, because they couldn't communicate working groups. We used mini whiteboards, just a white piece of paper on a inside a plastic envelope where they could write, and that included interactions. We involved them in signage campaigns, creating signage for the school, right, to help us with the social distancing. And then these are strategies that teachers have used to reinforce the physical presence of the students, naming them, giving examples, using students' names, maximizing student participation, and varying the organization of a physical space to accommodate different learning rhythms. For the biological ecosystem, there's a spelling mistake here. We had energizing breaks, typical ideas to break down to have like little mental breaks. The pairs, I'm doing a two truths and a lie, back to back. Questions, the questioning technique, questions generated by students, and then the teacher collects the questions. The students take out one question, and if they can answer it, they keep it. Otherwise, they put it back in a bag, and then that kind of interaction. And then doing visual yoga that some of my students did on when they were doing distance learning. And that is helping the students move their eyes, because one thing we notice is they are so used to looking at the screen that sometimes they don't even blink and their eyes begin to water. We now should allow food and drink in class. Our bodies have changed. And there are some attention focusing activities that we now can do. Things like visual dictation, putting things on the board in this order, vanishing text, writing something on the board and erasing, etc., etc. And then for the digital ecosystem, these are some things that my student teachers have found useful. Sending everything to their cell phones, finishing the lesson with a challenge for students to do online after the class, so that's so as to connect. And then you have, of course, some ideas like video clips, and the teacher creating like a summary video, very short, and sending it to their WhatsApp groups. Many of us are still using discussion forums to extend our classrooms. And these are some ideas that we have used. Expert for a week, you tell a couple of students to deal with a subject, with something from the course quickly and in depth. Discussion summarizer, you ask different students to summarize the discussion of the work of the week. Secret colleague, you assign a peer to help the ones who post online answer better, well, questions and answer challenge, etc. Now, this is a picture of my university where we're doing hybrid classes. You see, we have some students face-to-face, and many of our other students are here on the screen. Now, if you're doing hybrid lessons, remember that the important thing is these students on the screen. Plan with them in mind, because the ones who are on site will be able to do it on their own. Develop routines to engage remote students. Find ways to bring them to share things. Look at the camera, use breakout rooms wisely. Now, I'm going to go over this one quickly because I have extended my time, but I just want to conclude by saying something old, something new, something old, and more of the same. We have to recognize that teaching has changed. It now requires collaboration among teachers. Innovative strategies, whatever we do to innovate, are better than traditional strategies because they respond to the new uncertain scenarios. And these strategies favor peer-to-peer support and exchange of expertise. They engage hope as we learn from and with and for our students. And these strategies promote student autonomy. That makes our teaching and their learning more sustainable. So I want to thank you on behalf of IATEFL and all our activities, groups, and members in over 130 countries. And I want to leave you with this. This is our mission: to link, develop, and support English language teaching professionals worldwide. And I want to leave you with the words of the Brazilian pedagogue Paulo Freire, which I think summarize most of what I've done today that I have shared. As I said, it's a sharing of my work with my students. And he said, at the point of encounter, there are neither total ignoramuses, people who know nothing, nor perfect sages. At the point of encounter, there are just people trying together to know more than what they now know. So my friends, these are my references. And I'm going to stop sharing and opening up the floor to questions and discussions. Sorry, I had to rush at the end. I'm sorry. Oh, before, now let me share again. In case you need to contact me, you can contact me through either of these emails. Okay, Trump, I'm ready for questions.
So
Okay.
yes,
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Rico, for your very engaging presentation. So here we come to have a few questions that need to be addressed. So one of the most common ones is about the fact that can you give some ideas to put them into practice for the little and young learners?
I think that some of the ideas that I share can be adapted to many age levels. If you were able to tell me more specifically what kind of ideas you would need for on-site or for online, that would be a huge help.
I think if it would be a great idea if you can give one or two examples for each type of that.
Okay. Now, for online, when you're working with very young learners, it is not easy. You generally have to have an adult present, right? And the way we typically did things during the pandemic was to share with the adults through an email, for example. Today's class, we're going to learn the colors in English. These are things you can do with your child. Do not translate into Vietnamese. Find things around the house that are of a certain color and go on a color hunt, for example. Or if there are animals, let's take books that you may have in your house. Or if you're watching TV, engage your child in saying the name of the animal in English. The important thing was to extend the content with the target language, which in general is very reduced for very young learners, right? When we are back into the classroom, it's very hard because very young learners tend to be very physical and we need to keep social distancing. So one of the things that you can do is create circuits in the classroom, right? Some movement. So if you can draw on the floor with chalk, good old-fashioned chalk, or with whiteboard markers that can be wiped out after class, create little circuits for students to walk into the classroom, and as they walk, they can be talking about something, and then make sure you place them well around with 1.5 meters difference. So if they have to do something that comes together, where they come together, rethink that strategy. There might be things that you can do using your classroom walls, right? Using the strategy of corners, right? Instead of going to the corner, they can point to the corner. And these are just procedural things, but a lot depends on the theme you are working with, the language that your students have, how old they are, right? But the important thing is, if they are at home and still working, because think of the parents as well, or the caretakers of the children, right? The grandparent who is looking after them while the parents work, or the big sister, or the big brother. They need some directions, right? So help them to be your teaching buddies.
Okay, so thank you for your so we move to the second one. That is the side of learner. So we move to the side of teacher. So in terms of teacher well-being, what are some suggestions that you may have in response to the impact of COVID-19 and the resulting challenges?
Well, the first piece of advice that I have for you, both on-site and online, is be very clear with your students. In my university, for example, we made a decision. Classes finish on Fridays at 4 o'clock. So teachers would not respond to emails over the weekend. teachers would start responding to emails Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And one thing, because students want immediate things, you know, and if you give them a deadline, they're going to say 2 minutes before the deadline, kind of have an extension. We wrote very clear guidelines about extensions. We use a learning management system. Maybe you know it's called Moodle. It has a calendar function. So we prearrange reminders towards the deadlines so that students will receive an email saying you have 5 days to submit this, you have 3 days to submit this. And one thing is we changed the typical calendar. We didn't start classes on Monday. We had to start a unit, we started on a Tuesday. Why? Because we found out that students wouldn't do work in the weekends, but teachers did. And we wanted teachers to actually be able to manage their free time. It's fundamental that we get a good rest. It's fundamental that while we are teaching, we incorporate activities inside our online classes that have us move around, right? The energy breaks, just rotating shoulders, standing up, turning around a couple of times, right? Simply touching your feet from your chair, and you engage the students in doing that. And then the visual yoga, and the visual yoga can be just like, I don't know if you can see my eyes, but very close to the screen. Look up, look down, look to the left, look to the right. Now let's make an 8 with our eyes, right? This visual yoga kind of relaxes the muscles in the eyes, because otherwise we tend to be very like this, right? Another thing in terms of teacher well-being is make sure that when you are grading work, you are not over-grading. Sorry. What do I mean by that? Many times we tend to be very specific with our corrections to students, right? One thing that I have found useful is a 2-peer submission process. So the teacher assigns some work, right? The student sends it to a peer of their choice. And then when they receive feedback, they may rewrite it, and then they send it to a peer the teacher specifies. And only when that peer has given feedback and the student has edited their work, it comes to the teacher. Another thing, help your students, like for example, teaching writing. Sometimes you're teaching writing like argumentative essays or whatever it is that you teach. You have criteria in the instructions for the task. Have students use different colors to highlight. For example, write a story telling about an incident that you witnessed in the street where there was an accident. Say who the people were and highlight that part in blue. Explain what happened and highlight that part in green. That helps both the students process the instructions so that they do the task correctly. And it also helps the teacher look at the color coding on the page and say, yeah, they have included everything, or no, they haven't included anything. So those are all little things that help us teachers reduce our workload.
Thank you. On the suggestions are very wonderful and extension. I'm so sorry that because of the limited time, so we cannot include all the questions. But I think that we invite all of our participants to send you email in case of there any questions, right? And I hope that you have a very good experience with our presenter. So again, on behalf of the VIC 2021, we wish you all the best and with the productive day and meaningful rest of our virtual convention. So thank you, our presenter, and thank you, our participants. So enjoy a very good Saturday and see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Really useful and motivating.
Did you find it useful, Trump?
Yes,
Tom?
very much.
Yeah. Was it what you expected?
Mm-hmm. Though I think I do think that because you are a professor at university, I do expect something quite academic, but I was quite surprised because it's surprisingly useful and
Okay.
practical.
Well, I made some changes after we talked the other day. I made some
Yeah.
changes to make sure that the practical side was there, right? So instead of talking so much about the ecosystems from the theory perspective, we looked at them from the practical side. So I